Hello everyone, I am Pepe.
And I'm Daria.
First, we'd like to introduce ourselves. We are two professionals in the field of sustainability. Daria has a bachelor's in political sciences, and I studied sustainable development engineering. So, our approach to sustainability comes a bit from different perspectives. My background is more scientific, and Daria's is more focused on social issues. We also studied a master's in sustainable development together at the KU Leuven in Belgium. Not only were we classmates, but we are also neighbors, and we wanted to put our expertise into use by sharing our knowledge about sustainability with you, the general public.
We know that sustainability is something that everyone hears about, and there is an overwhelming amount of information out there. We also know that the word sustainability is often used by people, companies, and governments, but they use it to excuse behavior that's harmful to our society and our planet. This is not what actual sustainability is.
We are citizens. We are consumers, but also fundamentally human beings. We have the responsibility to be aware of our environment and actually realize the power that we hold. It's not only through voting or purchasing, but it's also through changing our behaviors and inspiring others into action. And the very first step of that is to learn more about the subjects that matter for our world, one of them being sustainability. So, we welcome you to the first episode of our podcast. Everything is sustainability.
We named the podcast Everything is Sustainability because while we were discussing what we should talk about in the podcast, we made a huge list of topics that are completely different than each other, but they were still interconnected. It's covered from fashion to biodiversity, from justice to agriculture. So we turned to each other and we said that we think everything is sustainability.
But for the first episode, we want to explain the concept of sustainability itself from an academic standpoint to give you an accessible definition.
So we will start by explaining what it actually means, some examples of how complex it is. Then we talk about some of its aspects and ways to measure it, like sustainable development goals and planetary boundaries.
We will also mention some modern issues, such as overconsumption, fast fashion, and meat production. Afterwards, we will share some success stories and tips for daily life to inspire you to be more sustainable.
Yes, so let's get started with it.
So what is sustainability, Daria?
Well, it is a complex concept and it has many definitions and people tend to stretch it according to their benefits. But everybody would accept that we have limited resources on the planet Earth. We should be able to use these resources to meet our needs, yes, but we have to avoid their exploitation. So that is enough for the future generations. And this is sustainability. It is actually the first definition that's proposed by the United Nations.
So, what matters is not using everything up, to leave something for society later on.
Yes, this is a part of sustainability, but it's not only about the society. Humans are only a part of the ecosystem, and we're not masters of it. So, sustainability doesn't exist only to serve the society. It's here to guide us live in a harmony with the larger planetary system.
So the society and the environment should exist together, without claiming control over each other.
It is true. We call them the pillars of sustainability. Society, environment, and economy.
Ah yeah, the economy.
Economy may sound a little capitalistic to mention, but in reality, we need economic viability to make sure sustainability can be afforded. We need these three pillars to achieve sustainable development. But these issues are a bit more complex than they sound. It's not only about fulfilling a social, environmental, or an economic goal. There are costs and benefits to be considered, and everything should be all balanced.
Yeah, for example, like with electric cars.
Oh yes, the electric cars. They may appear more sustainable than gas cars because they emit less greenhouse gases. But in reality, they require more mining. This then leads to environmental pollution and a lot of social consequences on mining communities. And from this example, you can actually see that technology is an important element of sustainability.
That's right. Technological advancements can help us have smaller impact on the environment. There's new technologies like recycling, which give us more opportunities to be smarter with our resources. But technology isn't everything, and there are also other elements.
Yes, there are other elements such as cultural, regulatory, political.
Exactly. Culture affects how people interact with nature. For instance, we have a lot of whales in my region in Mexico. And since before Spanish colonization, the native people saw them as an important part of the sea and of the community. So, even now, people want to protect them. Now we also have regulations to keep the whale safe. This is a good example of how culture and politics can interact in the case of sustainability.
Now that you mention politics, this is also how we got the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals by United Nations.
Yeah, that's correct. These are 17 goals. People think that these goals are only about the environment, and of course, there are goals purely about the environment, such as life on land, life below water, or even climate action. But I believe the most important goals are mostly social. For instance, no poverty and zero hunger.
And my personal passion, gender equality.
Yeah, the SDGs were agreed upon in 2015 to try to achieve a sustainable world by 2030, which is sad. because we only have 4 years left, and we really haven't achieved any of them. But they definitely help to put sustainability discussions on the radar. It helped make them more mainstream.
Yeah, true. The SDGs are quite popular. We keep hearing them about everywhere.
But one thing we don't hear much about is the planetary boundaries. They're a more scientific way to measure human impact on the environment. There's what we call an environmental ceiling, and this tells us how much impact we can have before harming the planet's ability to regenerate. We also have what we call a social foundation, which is the minimum amount of resources that we need to be able to meet our needs.
That's right. If you cut a tree, it will grow back, but if you cut a forest, it's much harder to regenerate, only if it's possible.
Exactly. In that same way, we can only use so many resources before the Earth loses its capacity to heal. We sadly are using too many resources. So much so that July 24th of last year was what we call Overshoot Day. This means that we used all the resources that the Earth can give us in the whole year by July. The rest of the year, we just kept using resources, and we're not letting the Earth recover.
Well, the main issue here is that we produce way too much than we need. For instance, roughly 1/3 of the food that we produce, which is around 30-40%, is actually thrown out. That means that all the land and water that was put into growing this food is simply wasted.
By the way, also about 1/3 of the world population has to deal with food insecurity, which also relates to the second SDG, Zero Hunger.
Exactly. Not only that we produce way too much, but we also don't deliver it to the right people. This is not the only example of overconsumption. Fast fashion comes to my mind. This is clothes that made by cheap material. And what I mean by cheap is that they're made of petroleum, so basically they're plastics. These fabrics, they don't last long, and they're meant to be worn only a few times. Also, the design of these clothes, honestly, they don't last too long because it's made to follow certain fashion trends. They'll go out of style really quickly, so they're made to be thrown out really quickly too.
There's a lot of companies that do this just to make money off of the dress, and we're not so sure we can name drop them, but we're sure you know who they are.
Exactly. And these same companies, they also like to greenwash. They might say that their clothes come from recycled materials, or they collect old clothes to recycle, but in reality they're just greenwashing as a part of their marketing campaign. I actually have an article here. In 2023, a group of journalists in Sweden left tracking devices in recycling bins of one of these fashion brands. But instead of recycling centers, the clothes actually ended up in the landfills in West Africa.
And that's with used clothes. Unsold clothes, which have never been used, are equally just sent to landfill or even incinerated.
I hear greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, and talking about greenhouse gases, we should also mention meat production. Livestock emits some of the largest amounts of these greenhouse gases, mainly methane, and mainly from cows. This production is usually done to feed richer countries that don't really need to eat so much meat.
Or any meat at all. Life is more beautiful without meat, guys.
Yeah, because the concerns over meat production are not only in their emissions, but also in how many resources it needs. The land dedicated to livestock, and also to growing their food, covers more than 1/4 of all land on Earth. It is also the main cause for deforestation worldwide. As well as land, a lot of water is also needed.
And of course, there are a lot of ethical concerns about meat consumption, but we're not going to go so deep into this time. These are all great topics for future episodes.
But of course, you have to keep tuning in to hear more about those.
Well, we mentioned a lot of problems, but guys, please don't get depressed. There are also good news. The problems we face have solutions, and we even have examples of some of these success stories.
Almost everyone has heard about the ozone layer. This is a layer of the atmosphere that protects us from the harmful parts of sunlight. Well, there used to be a hole in the ozone layer because of certain chemicals that we were using in fridges and spray cans. When 2 scientists discovered that these chemicals destroy ozone, the world decided to hear them, and we got together to ban them.
Yes, this was the Montreal Protocol, and it has been one of the most successful environmental protection stories ever.
That's right, it was so successful that the hole in the ozone layer has basically disappeared. This protocol was set up around 30 years ago, but even today the ozone layer keeps getting better.
And of course, this is not the only success story we have. As even today, there are some developments that can give us some hope.
Yeah, for example, there are 2 big news about sustainability this year. First, the green sea turtles are no longer endangered. Finally, decades of protection efforts have paid off and their populations are recovering.
And also, this year, International Court of Justice made a historical decision that allows countries to sue each other about climate change. This will help countries vulnerable to climate change, and it will give them a chance to take legal action against polluting countries.
These are good advancements, but big sustainability action doesn't have to be only large scale. It can also start as an individual effort.
Okay, so there is an interesting story from Ireland that shows how individual action is really important. In 1984, Mary Manning, who was a shop owner in Dublin, started to refuse selling grapefruits from South Africa to protest apartheid regime. Her and other 10 ladies working in the shop went on strike without much external support.
Apparently, grapefruits were not so popular in Ireland because no one really cared that much.
Yeah, but this changed when South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu visited them. He invited the grapefruit ladies, we like to call, to South Africa, but they were not allowed to enter the country. This issue made the news in Ireland, and Ireland became the first Western country to ban the importation of South African goods. This continued until the apartheid regime fell.
This last example might not be so much about the environment, but it touches on human rights. Even if it doesn't seem like it, it is sustainability, because everything is sustainability.
And the same way that everything is sustainability, everyone can do sustainability. And Pepe has some recommendations for you.
Of course, one of the easiest actions you can take is, in general, to consume less. As we said before, the big source of the problems is just how much stuff we make and we use. Consuming less means you use less resources. Eating less meat is a good start, as we said before, for example. Chemicals are another problem. Non-stick pans and cleaning products, especially bleach, are really harmful.
Oh, I hate using bleach for everything. It pollutes the water resources. And you can actually switch to organic cleaning supplies like white vinegar or baking soda.
Besides not consuming so much, you can also change your other habits to have a smaller impact. Transportation comes to mind. You can try moving around by cycling and walking, or even using public transit whenever you can. This is better for your body, but also for the environment. At least better than using a car all the time.
Of course, this doesn't apply for everyone. Not all cities allow you to walk or bike everywhere, but it's still important for everyone to find a little step to take towards sustainability.
Daria, for example, walks everywhere. So I know that if I'm going out with her, I cannot even take the bus, even if it's also sustainable. The smallest things we do are important. Personally, we stopped using plastic tea bags. Most of our clothes buying is secondhand. We use less stuff with plastic packaging.
Yes, and Pepe actually made us sign up for veggie bags here in Leuven. Every week we get some random vegetables that's locally grown in Leuven. We often don't know even their names, but it pushes us to try out new vegetarian recipes and we enjoy it very much.
And if we don't figure a recipe out, we usually just mash everything. It's still tasty though.
Yeah, exactly. It's delicious. And finally, it's important to keep yourself involved in the discussion of sustainability. So read more, learn more, which you're already doing by listening to our podcast, but also be a part of your community.
Like with your neighbors.
Precisely, with your neighbors.
And that's the end of our first episode. We will be publishing a new one every 6 weeks. On Spotify, on YouTube, or on the website of Orimag. www.orimag.com.tr. By the way, if you're interested in reading more about some of the things we mentioned here, we will include some sources in the description.
And with that, we are your friendly neighborhood sustainability buddies, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.